on the program right now by Joe Bishop-Henchman. And Joe is Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union Foundation. And he wants to give us a heads up here because there's a big story brewing in Washington, D.C. that could affect North Dakotans. Joe, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the show today.
Great to be with you. Let's talk taxes.
Yeah, let's talk taxes. I like it. It gets kind of nerdy for a lot of people, but we dig it on this show. I like talking about taxes, especially when we're trying to figure out how to keep our tax bills down. And you've got some numbers to share with us about what it could mean if we can't get this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extended. What do we need to know?
Well, if for your average North Dakota tax filer, your federal taxes will go up $2,400 if Congress doesn't act by the end of the year. And where that comes from was back in 2017 when Congress passed the tax bill that we now live under, the tax code we're under right now, they had it expire on December 31st, 2025, which is now this year. When they passed it, maybe it was forever in the future. And it does feel like a long time ago this year, back to 2017, but right. It expires this year. So if Congress does not act, all those tax cuts go away and taxes automatically go up $2,400 a year for your average North Dakota filer.
I saw your numbers on this, and you've done great work here. South Dakota, it's even worse, $2,551. Minnesota, just a little better, $2,360. Out in Montana, it's almost $2,700. This is per family, so this is a big impact for people. Yet I keep hearing, Joe, that the Democrats in Congress want to let these tax cuts expire. What do we need to know about this, and why are the Democrats digging in on something that would apparently hurt families that we know?
Well, they want to let the Republicans own this, even if it hurts a lot of people, which is unfortunate. And with the margins in the Republican House and Senate, it's going to really come down to the wire. And it's really important for members of Congress, of whatever party, to hear from people that this is important, and also that it shouldn't necessarily be put off to the last minute. I mean, they have until December 31st to do something about it, but that doesn't mean they need to wait until December 31st to do something about it.
Right. Now, if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires, I've got to think that most American taxpayers are going to get an increase, right? It's not just people in the Dakotas and Montana.
Right, about 80% of Americans, and for about 150 million Americans who no longer itemize. That was a big reform of the 2017 bill, where it used to be a lot of Americans would have to go out to their tax preparer with the box of receipts and everything and go through everything. The reforms, which simplified things in 2017, increased the standard deduction, that is the amount of tax-free income that you earn before you have to worry about receipts and everything. Mm-hmm. That's now over 90% of Americans who no longer have to deal with the receipts and everything. And that's one of the reforms that will go away if Congress doesn't act by the end of the year. And that we've done some studies of it at National Taxpayers Union at NTU, where I work, and that reduced tax compliance costs by 2 billion hours. It was a big deal. It was a big savings.
I've got to think that when we're talking about sort of those efficiencies, it sort of brings to mind another topic I love talking about, and that's a flat tax. It seems to me if we could just get 15% across the board, it seems like that would make a lot of sense. If you don't make very much money, your 15% isn't very much. If you make a lot, your 15% is a lot more. And it would ease some of these, it would make the tax code a lot more simple. It would require us to have less time and less work doing our taxes. So a flat tax is another idea here that could figure into that as well. Is the National Taxpayers Union Foundation, do you all have a position on flat tax?
We love to see tax reforms and tax simplifications of all kind, including flat taxes. And we're one of the champions of it. Steve Forbes, if you remember his name, he's on our board.
Yeah. Okay.
He was one of the big champions of the flat tax in the 90s. And, it has been talked about federally. I don't know. I mean, we'll see if it ends up being part of the mix. But something that has happened is at the state level, we now have half the states either with no income tax or a flat income tax. And that's a big change from where we were in 2017, including, of course, in North Dakota. North Dakota didn't have a flat tax in 2017.
Yeah.
So this tax bill, even though it didn't put in a federal flat tax, the changes it made enabled a lot of states to do that, and we'd hate to see those gains lost.
I think pretty much all of my listeners and you and I would agree that low taxes is a good thing, but I do hear a lot of people saying right now that with a $36 trillion deficit, we can't afford to cut taxes because we need the revenue to be able to make ends meet in our country. We've got a rising debt already. So tell me a little bit about how your organization looks at that whole debate of if you lower taxes, it's less revenue going into the government, and that would be a bad thing with deficits and debts as high as they are. How do you feel about that? What does your organization have to say on that issue?
Oh, we agree, and you're not alone in that view. We've done a lot of focus grouping and polling, and people are very concerned about the national debt, and they really don't want anything, whether it's new spending or a new tax bill or whatever, just put on the credit card. They want to see Congress making hard decisions and prioritizing and actually living within its means. And that's some of the debate that's happening right now that people really should weigh in on and let their members of Congress know. Should federal spending be reined in? Do we really need 100 different identical programs doing the same thing? And then as we're going into taxes, as we're maybe giving some new breaks for tips or overtime or Social Security, should we be taking some other breaks away? And we're weighing in on that all the time at NTU, and members of Congress need to hear about it from the people that elect them.
Yeah, absolutely. I spent a lot of time following Larry Kudlow, and he has Art Laffer on his program a lot. You probably recognize those gentlemen there. Those guys are convinced that the more you lower taxes, the better the whole picture gets for the country and the country's economy, because you'll have that much more activity. The activity will be higher, the taxes will be lower, and in the end, those two gentlemen believe that the money coming in to the federal government will be higher. And if you take a look at some of the tax cuts that happened in 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you take a look at the federal tax revenues, and they did go up even when those taxes were cut before. Is there any reason to think that the same wouldn't hold true if the president did additional tax cuts here in his second administration?
Taxes make a real difference. They really do impact incentives and people's decisions and new job growth. One of the big reforms of the 2017 bill is this idea of full expensing. That is, allowing businesses to deduct the full cost of investment in new equipment and new expansions, rather than having to parse those deductions over a bunch of years. And we saw a big increase in business investment in 2018 and 2019, which we attribute to that reform. There are other tax cuts that maybe don't have that impact. One big discussion right now is how much to increase the cap on the state and local deduction, the SALT cap. New Yorkers and Californians and New Jerseyans are really pushing for that to get more money in the pockets of people, high-income people in high-tax states. We've done the numbers on that, and actually over half of the benefit will go to those three states. North Dakota the share that would go to North Dakota taxpayers rounds to 0%. That's how low it is. So that's something that Congress needs to hear about too. That maybe something like the business expensing deduction should be more of a priority than raising the SALT cap.
Joe, I'm sorry if I missed your answer on that, but does the NTU, do you subscribe to that theory that I hear from Laffer and Kudlow, that if taxes go down, it will be better for the economy in the long run, or do you disagree with that theory?
Oh, no, we agree with it. Now, they don't always pay for itself, and I think it was Milton Friedman who said a tax cut that pays for itself isn't enough of a cut. But we're always running the numbers, and we're champions and fans of any idea that gets the size and scope of government smaller.
Yeah, well, we can definitely say amen to that, no question. The Congress has got until the end of this year to do something, either a new tax package or to extend that. There's talk about this all happening, and I keep hearing people in Congress, Republicans on the Hill, saying, relax, be patient. We're going to get this done. There's some question about when and how, but we will get this done. What are you hearing with your ear to the ground on this? Do we have a good chance of getting these tax cuts extended, or is it still a 50-50 battle, or even something worse than that?
I'm hearing Memorial Day talked about, which is not that far off. I'm hearing July 4th talked about. But if it's, 5th of July and it hasn't happened yet, I think we really need to go into overdrive and make sure they know this is a priority, especially if we're going to be facing economic headwinds and if the economy hits a few snags. I mean, the certainty in the tax code is exactly what we need to make sure that we don't lose our stride in terms of job growth and new investment. I
agree. We've been talking about this in terms of North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota families, but what about small business? What happens to small business here if these tax cuts are allowed to expire and don't get resuscitated somehow? What happens to small business on this, Joe?
Well, there's a line on the income tax code that every small business owner knows about, and maybe no one else does, but it's called the Section 199A deduction. And if you're a small business owner, you take it, and it's worth about 20% of your tax reduction. It's a big deal, and it completely expires at the end of the year if Congress doesn't act. So that's a big deal. The deduction for new investment, when I already talked about, that's important for small businesses. And then just generally, I would say certainty. That's a real downside of having our tax code expire every so often, is it takes away the certainty that business people really need for long-term investments. And I'd love to see a lot of this, instead of extending it another 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, how about we try to make it as much of it permanent as we can?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I noticed in your list of the states that are most affected or would be most affected if these cuts expire, you got states like North Dakota, Montana are in there, but so are states like Connecticut and New York. So you've got a real mix of states in there. What makes some states more susceptible to impact on this than others, Joe?
It's just really how states interact with the federal tax code. Our federal tax code, I think everybody has a vague idea of what it includes in the tax code and what it doesn't, as well as the income levels by state. So in our paper that you're referencing, which is at NTU.org, we really do dig in state by state just to look at those, and we show our maps too, and we catalog all the interactions in order to show why some states are impacted more than others. So if any of your listeners have family in another state, or you're thinking about moving or whatever, we put all the information out there for people to reference.
Yeah, it's a really good report. I'd encourage you to check it out. It's not too hard to find, ntu.org, and you can find this report. They give you about 10 different pages of categories, and they really get in to a lot of depth on these things. So it's a great read if you're interested in these kinds of things. And if you care about the future of your paycheck and your family's future and where your state and your country are at, it's definitely worth a perusal here over the weekend. Joe, I appreciate you taking the time. It's been great to meet you and have you add some wisdom to our program today. Any last thoughts, maybe something I didn't ask you about that you would like to make sure that you offer before we finish up, or something that you talked about that you really want to drive home before we finish here on this conversation today?
Well, always happy to join you, and I do hope they get it done by Memorial Day or 4th of July, but if it's not, always happy to come back and tell more about why it's even more important that we not let the tax code expire.
Yeah, we'll take you up on that if that happens. Let's hope that we get some clarity a little earlier in the calendar than that, but you never know. Thanks so much, Joe. You take care and have a great rest of the day.
Anytime. Thanks.
Thank you. Joe Bishop-Henchman, Executive VP at the National Taxpayers Union Foundation. All right, 5:50.